The Prime Minister of Iceland, Katrin Jakobsdottir, is urging other governments to adopt a new green, family-friendly way of measuring their country's wealth. And her country is leading the way. Jakobsdottir has teamed up with Scotland's Nicola Sturgeon and New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern to promote what they've dubbed the Wellbeing agenda. It's meant to put social measurements like health and happiness ahead of traditional GDP figures in importance when it comes to federal budgets. The concept is an attempt to build a more modern society by tackling big issues like climate change, inequality and access to digital services. Alistair McGregor is a professor of political economy at the University of Sheffield in the UK and has written a book called Wellbeing, Resilience and Sustainability, a New Trinity of Governance. Thank you very much for talking to us this morning. Is it a bit idealistic to say we're going to measure things like health and happiness over baseline GDP?
No, I don't think it's idealistic. I think it's absolutely necessary at this time. It's not about either or. We need to measure our economies, but it's not enough to measure our economies. We need to also measure how people's lives are going.
Scotland have implemented something similar a little bit already, the National Performance Framework. How has that worked? Has it been a success?
Well, I think it's quite easy to say that you're going to have a wellbeing agenda, a wellbeing budget. The real challenge is to drive it down to make changes in how we govern and how we do policy. And the National Performance Framework is an example of how you can take the rhetoric of well-being and move it down into something that actually impacts on the lives of people in all communities.
What impact does it have when you can then measure it?
Well, the problem about measuring is if you measure something, it tends to become a focus of attention. So, in your news bulletins, we'll often hear how much our economy is growing or not growing. And then in another bulletin, we'll get something about environmental degradation and sustainability. We'll get something about inequality. The measure of GDP doesn't deal with the destruction of the environment by the way that the economy is working. It doesn't deal with the massive inequality and growing inequality that's destroying our societies. And if you have measures that take account of these, then politicians and policymakers can then also act on them.
So do we need a sort of well-balanced approach? Because, of course, you can't ignore GDP. It's an important factor in terms of people's life standards. Do you need to measure both?
Yes, you need to have measures of economic growth, that's for sure. And we need economic growth. Certain societies need it probably more than others. But we need to balance those because some economic growth can be harmful to human beings. It may worsen inequality. It may cause environmental damage that our children are going to have to live with in the future.